That started my addiction to science fiction.
And your father also produced 20-odd movies over his career, including, I think, the last one was The Witches of Eastwick, starring Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
So what kind of childhood did you have growing up in Los Angeles, and was having a mother and father in the business, was that a strong influence?
Well, you know, when you're raised on movie sets, it's kind of like being a kid going to the circus. You know, you immediately want to be circus folk. You know, so I from the youngest age, I was on movie sets, driving around in golf carts. But my father actually forbade me from being in the business, and it caused a big rift for a while. But ultimately, we reconciled when I actually started making money.
And you acted in one of the films when you were quite young. You acted in one of the films that he produced, My Bodyguard.
Well, I guilted him through my grandmother at 13 to let me be an extra in a movie he did called Harry and Walter Go to New York. And then I was working as a PA in Chicago on My Bodyguard, and it was about kids my age. So on my 17th birthday, they threw me in and gave me a scene.
And what kind of a student were you in high school?
Just awful. Just an awful student. In California at the time, there was this thing called Proposition 13, and what it did is it cut funding at all the schools for things like the arts. And the school I was in had been a very successful art department as far as winning a lot of awards. And so I decided I was just going to take it over, even though there's no more funding. So that became all of my preoccupation, and my schoolwork went in the toilet, and so I had very bad grades. I was fortunate enough that I had won some awards in high school, so that when I was in New York, I was actually recognized by someone from those festivals, and I was asked if I wanted to go to NYU, and on full scholarship, because in those days NYU treated their film school like other colleges treated their football department. And so I was a ringer. So they brought me in, and for 2 weeks I was a student there until they kicked me out.
In most of your 20s, you were an actor.
Well, I started actually as Al Pacino's chauffeur. And while I was working for him, he kind of gave me a whole new way of thinking about acting. Because growing up in Los Angeles, all you needed was a photograph and a resume, and you were an actor. But in New York, there was a much higher standard, and working for Al Pacino, there was a much higher standard. And he really kind of inspired me, and so I left working for him to do a play. And it was an interesting time because there was two other friends of mine who I knew in high school who had gone to an opposing high school that we used to compete against each other. And one of them was Kevin Spacey and the other one was Val Kilmer. And all three of us had Broadway plays opening on the same weekend. Val Kilmer quit his the night before it opened. But after that brought me back to Los Angeles, and then I was working as an actor until the end of the 80s.
I mean, through 1980 to 1990, you appeared in about 30 television films and movies. So was that really your focus at the time, to be an actor? Did you have an ambition to become an actor full time? I mean, were you thinking at that point about anything else beyond acting?
For me, the acting was just the only road I saw to get to directing and producing, because I had not been able to stay at NYU and I didn't have that academic record. I didn't see another pathway, but I thought, well, if I could act, maybe I can get on a TV series, maybe they'll let me direct an episode or two. But what ended up happening was a very different route. Is I ended up getting cast in a really bad science fiction movie. And the film was shooting in Germany. And I'll never forget, because on the same day that I got cast in that film, I was cast in a play. And it was between me and Keanu Reeves. And I really wanted to beat Keanu Reeves out for the play to prove I was a better actor. And I got it, I got the part. So my agent said, well, you also got the movie. I said, well, screw the movie, I'm doing the play. And he goes, the play pays $200 a week. And I was like, when does the movie start? So I went to Germany, and I saw the most beautiful sets. I mean, I couldn't believe how gorgeous these sets were. And the director was so good with the camera and so good working with the actors. I said to the director, I said, why are you directing this piece of shit script? And he said, well, when I wrote it...
So we're talking about Moon 44, which of course was directed by...
Roland Emmerich.
Roland Emmerich.
And but Roland had barely spoke English at the time. And he was shooting a movie entirely in English. So his dialogue was very stilted. It didn't sound the way an American talks. So I said to him, would it be okay if I started to improvise my dialogue? And he said, oh yeah, that'd be great, do that. So I started doing that. Well, about 3 days later, he pulled me off the set. He said, we have a very big problem. All the other actors are very upset with you. I said, with me? He goes, yeah, you have all the best lines in the movie now. So he said, would you write their lines too? So I said, sure. So now I'm rewriting my lines, I'm rewriting their lines. Anyway, when the film was finished, it was awful. And Roland was very scared because he had bankrolled his brother's house to pay for the movie. So he called me up and he said, how do we fix this? And I said, well, for it to be really good, we're gonna have to reshoot like half of it. And he said, I can't afford that. How can we make it good enough I can sell it? So I came up with this idea of a new opening, a new ending, a new middle. We rewrote it, we shot it in Los Angeles, and he was able to sell it. And that movie got him Universal Soldier. And then he asked me to write that with him.
Right, you were the writer of Universal Soldier. Had you already started writing? I mean, when you were an actor in Hollywood, you were already writing, and that was something you were doing?
I was writing a lot, but the problem is because I was known as an actor, no one would take my writing seriously. I actually still have a rejection letter from CAA saying, stick to acting, kid.
And you were also very passionate about music when you were young then as well. And I think we can share that you were in a pop group.
For a very short period of time, I was in a new wave rock band called Nervous Service. And we got this demo deal with Geffen Records, where they paid.
Which was pretty good.
Well, they were paying for the demo to see whether or not we were going to be good enough. And we go to record a song that I wrote. And so we were in the recording studio, and one by one, each one of us are being replaced by a professional musician. So that none of us are actually playing any of the music.
But one of the people in the band became quite a well-known musician.
Yes, John Jorgensen.
Right. Who was a guitarist
and probably the best mandolin player in America. Right. And also an expert at Django Reinhardt guitar. But at the time, we were a pop band. Anyway, so we recorded all through the night. Finally, we were done about 4 a.m. We played it back. Everybody was cheering and high-fiving, and I went, I quit. And they went, what? I said, I quit. They go, but this sounds great. I go, it sounds mediocre. And I don't want to spend my life doing something I'm mediocre at.
But you do still play music today, and you have a band still today?
Yes, but we don't charge anybody. I figure if you're not asking anyone to pay for it, it's okay to be kind of mediocre.
What is your favorite rock band?
The Beatles. I only play the Beatles.
And what is it about the Beatles that you love?
Well, their music is deceptively simple. It sounds like it's simple, and then as you get into it and you start to play it, you realize how complex it is and how timeless it is. It's so interesting that every generation discovers it again. My youngest 8-year-old is a giant fan. My 15-year-old is a giant fan. There's something very, very magical about that band when they were together.
And still today, yeah, I think. So in 1992, you wrote Universal Soldier, which starred, of course, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. And I think that was probably Jean-Claude Van Damme's most successful film, or one of.
Well, what had happened was Roland Emmerich was hired to do another movie at the studio called Carolco. And I was the original writer of it for him. And the studio had hired another writer to do a totally different draft. And so Roland quit the movie, didn't want to do it. Like my draft, didn't like the other draft. And in the chaos of that moment, the studio called him up and said, look, I'm really sorry about what happened with the other movie. We have this movie called Universal Soldier. It's greenlit, do you want to do it? And Roland said, what's it about? And they said, we don't care. It's called Universal Soldier, and it stars Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and you can't spend more than $14 million. We don't care. Just make that movie, and we're happy. So Roland was all excited, and he called me up, and he said, Dean, we have a greenlit movie. It's fantastic. And I said, what's it about? He goes, it could be anything we want. We have to call it Universal Soldier, and it stars Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. And I said, Roland, do you know who those guys are? And he's like, well, I think one of them was in a Rocky movie, right? I said, yeah, you know the other guy? He goes, no. I said, I'll be right over. So I went to the video store and I rented all these Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. And one by one I put them into the VCR. And he was fast forwarding through it, getting more and more depressed. And finally, when he was done, he was just kind of sitting there like this. And I said, so Roland, we're gonna go do a movie with these two guys as the lead. What's the opening scene of a movie that stars these two guys? And Roland goes, they kill each other. And then they are zombies, and they don't have to act.
In 1994, you wrote and produced Stargate. It was your first
producer.
The first big Hollywood movie as a producer. You recently told me it was not a particularly happy experience.
Oh, it was brutal.
And can you share a little bit of what happened?
That would be a whole seminar if I go into everything. But the short of it was an independent movie. It was a movie that ended up costing $52 million. And at the time, that was the largest independent movie in history. And there were a lot of cooks in that kitchen. And because I was a first-time producer, they didn't really believe that I knew what I was doing. They tried to intimidate Roland. It was a very difficult time making the film. On top of it, our villain of the movie, Jay Davidson, our executive producer, wanted him in the film because he had just either gotten a nomination or won an Oscar for The Crying Game, and said he's going to be great for our foreign sales. Well, what we didn't know is he was a raging alcoholic and drug addict. So he was completely wasted the entire time we were shooting the movie. So we had just all these problems with the story, with our actors, with our financiers, and Roland and I really kept trying to make the movie we wanted to make. And as we got into post-production, there was enormous battles over the cut of the movie. And finally we lost the battle, and our executive producer put his own team in, they recut the movie, they changed the movie up and down, and then they tested it, and it was a complete and total disaster. Now the studio didn't care about it, the executive producer didn't care about it. So Roland and I went into the editing room at night, because this is when you still cut on film, and we stole the reels of film, and we took it to another editing suite, and for the next 5 days we cut in 12-hour shifts. He'd go 12 hours, I'd go 12 hours, he'd go 12, and we put the film back to the version we wanted. But we had no idea if we were making it better or making it worse. And when we were done, we took it to England to do the score. I still think this is David Arnold's best score. So we scored it in England, we mixed it in Canada, and then we came back to the United States, and the studio said, well, we want to test it again. And I was like, well, why do you want to test it? We can't change it, the movie's finished. And they said, well, we want to test it for marketing. So they go to do this final screen test, and again, we didn't know if we made it better, we made it worse, we had no idea. So I was in one stall of the bathroom, and Roland was in the other, and we were both throwing up, nervous about what was gonna happen. We walk into the theater just as it was ending, and it was a huge ovation. I mean, just giant cheers. And our executive producer pushed past us and went to the head of the studio and said, see, I fixed it.
But the studio sold it to a Canal,
Canal had been our financier.
They sold it to
MGM was going to be just the distributor, and because of the bad test screening, Canal Plus lost their faith in the movie, right, and they sold it entirely to MGM.
Right. Amazing. You walked off the set during the shooting of the film. You were so pissed off and depressed and unhappy, and you went to your hotel and packed your bags and then spoke to your father. What did he say to you?
Well, what had happened is our executive producer was trying to get me off the movie. So he had shown up on set a little bit drunk, and in front of my whole crew, he just bawled me out. and said I'm not a real producer, and that I should really be trying to fix this horrible script, and I shouldn't be on set, and just undermined me in front of this entire crew. Now, as you saw those sand dunes, we were shooting in 123-degree heat. It was very hard to lead that movie, and now I was undermined by the executive producer in front of everyone. So I was upset, and I went to my hotel room and I started packing my bags. And I got a call from my father. And he said, what are you doing? I said, you know what, I'm going home. I don't need to be here anymore. And he goes, why? And I told him what had happened, and I said, look, I get the same producer credit and the same money whether I'm here or I'm not here, so I'm just not gonna be here, screw this. And my dad, who was a movie producer, said, so you would rather that he yells at somebody else? And I went, what do you mean? He goes, you're saying to me, Dean, you don't want him to yell at you want him to yell at someone else. I was like, what's your point? And my dad said, if you're the one he's yelling at, you must scare the hell out of him. And I was like, oh. So I went back to the set. He started to try and bawl me out, and this time I bawled him out, and I said, get off my set, you drunken fuck. And if you don't, that director over there is gonna walk with me, and you can direct this movie all by yourself. And then he left.
So did that experience make you want to have more control over your films?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually Universal Soldier that made me want to start to be the producer. And then after Stargate, I realized I had to be the producer who had the power. And that kind of changed our lives, because the next film we did was Independence Day.
Right. The next film you made basically changed the world or partially destroyed it. In 1996, you wrote and produced Independence Day. On Wikipedia, it says, Independence Day is considered a significant turning point in the history of the Hollywood blockbuster. It was at the forefront of large-scale disaster films and sci-fi resurgence of the 90s. It grossed over $817 million worldwide, becoming the highest grossing film of 1996, and became the second highest grossing film ever made at that time. The film won Academy Award for Best Visual Effects and was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Sound. What I, and like many people, I think remember about the film was its advertising campaign. Poster taglines like, we've always believed we weren't alone. On July 4th, you'll wish you were. Earth, take a good look, it could be your last. And don't make any plans for August. These were all actually on the posters. One of the most memorable images from the film is the White House blowing up. Where did the idea to blow up the White House come from?
Well, as Roland and I were working on the movie, we wanted to we didn't want to personalize the aliens. So we weren't going to make them into characters. We were going to treat it like a natural disaster, like locusts. So if you don't have a personality that you can hang your head on, how do you make them feel like they are just unstoppable? And that's when we thought, if they blow up the White House, it's going to feel like they're unstoppable. And so we did.
And you, soon after the film was finished and before it was released, the film was screened in the White House, and you sat in a screening with the President of America at that time. What did he say about that moment?
Well, it was one of the most surreal experiences, because we were actually in New York doing the press conference. And in the middle of my interview, each of us had our own room where we would do interviews with the press, and I was in the room and the phone was ringing. And it was like really annoying. I said, why is the phone ringing in the middle of my interview? And I finally said, I'm sorry, let me just get this. And I pick up the phone and it's like, is this Dean Devlin? I said, yeah. He goes, this is the White House. Uh-huh. Can you come tonight for dinner and a screening of the movie? Yeah. So we hung up, helicopter landed on the roof, we got in the helicopter, took us to LaGuardia, flew us, it was just like this whirlwind. And next thing I know, I'm in the White House with the director, Roland Emmerich, and Bill Pullman, who plays the president, and we're watching the movie in the White House. And we're watching the White House blow up from inside the White House. So it was a very surreal experience.
How old were you when you made Independence Day?
I think I was 34.
And how did the film's success affect you at that time?
Well, first, it turned me into a raging egomaniac, which was just terrible, and that's why we made the movie Godzilla. Godzilla was a giant failure, and it humbled us and brought us back down to earth again. Sometimes failure can be the best thing that ever happens to you, and I think that did that for us.
As you say, that film had a mixed reception critically and commercially, and you've actually been quoted in the press for saying that you blamed your own script of Godzilla
100%.
Partially on that.
Well, not partially, 100%. I mean, I think Roland did a great job directing it. I think the actors were terrific. And even though people made fun of the effects, there was a technical reason why it went wrong at the last minute. If you actually look at a Blu-ray of it today, you'll see the effects were spectacular. But the script made a fatal mistake that I should have caught early and I should have fixed, which was Roland and I had this intellectual idea that we weren't going to personify Godzilla, that he was neither good nor evil. He was just a really large lizard, and as a really large lizard, we're in jeopardy and we're in danger. And while that's kind of conceptually an interesting idea, for a movie it's a terrible idea, because the audience didn't know, am I supposed to love Godzilla? Am I supposed to hate Godzilla? Am I frightened of Godzilla? Am I rooting for him? And it just made everything feel stupid. And there's like this long sequence at the end where it's painfully dying and the heartbeat is getting slower and slower. And you're like, why do I care? Do I care? Am I supposed to care? And that could have been easily fixed in the script, and we should have fixed it, and we didn't.
In 2000, you produced The Patriot, a historical epic set during the time of the American Civil War. It starred Mel Gibson and an up-and-coming young actor called Heath Ledger. John Williams composed the music, and the film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including one for cinematography, music, and sound. What drew you and Roland to the subject matter of the American Civil War?
Well, it was actually the Revolutionary War, not the Civil War. The thing that was happening at the time is the head of the studio had asked us if we would be interested in doing a movie about the Battle of Midway, which ironically Roland did many, many years later. But when he said, would you guys be interested in doing a movie about the Battle of Midway, we jumped on it. We thought this would be so great. And we started reading sample scripts. And at one point, they came in very excited and said, look, we're not going to make this movie, but this is the same guy who just wrote Saving Private Ryan. He's a great writer. You should read the script as a writing sample, and we could hire him to do Midway. So we read the script, and it was Patriot. And we were like, we want to do this one. And they let us. And they also found out that they couldn't do Battle of Midway anyway because the studio was Sony, and Sony is owned by a company in Japan, and they didn't want to tell that story.
In the late 90s, you also began a successful career in television and created a TV show called The Visitor. In 2000s, you produced the hit show Leverage, about a group of high-tech crooks who steal from wealthy criminals and corrupt businessmen. The series ran for 76 episodes and recently went back into production as Leverage 2.0. In 2013, you produced another hit show, The Librarians, about a group of librarians that set off on adventures to save mysterious ancient artifacts. Most recently, you produced The Outpost, which ran for 4 seasons, 3 of which were made here in Serbia. How different is it working in television to movies?
In many ways, it's not different, and in many ways, it's completely different. So it's not different in that you still have a story to tell, and you have to use what resources you have. But on television, you have a lot less resources and a lot less time. But there's also a beauty to that. You know, we were on set today, and I was telling a story about Roland Emmerich, and the story goes like this. The story was on Universal Soul. On the first movie I met him in that I was acting in, it was called Moon 44. We were at the last day of shooting, and he had run out of money for the movie. And so he asked everybody on set if they had any money. So all of us reached into our pockets and we pulled out whatever we had, and it came to $3,000. And so Roland took $1,000 and he handed it to one PA, and he said, there's a factory that makes toilet paper. Get as many of the cardboard center before they chop it up as you can for $1,000. He took another 1,000 and he went to another PA and he said, there's a glass factory down the road. Get me 1 foot by 3 feet sheets of glass, as many as you can get for $1,000. And then he took the last 1,000 and he gave it to a third PA and said, get me as much black paint as you can buy. So he went out, they all came back, he took the paint, he painted one side of the glass black, which made them all into mirrors. He painted the dowels black and then poured cooking oil over them to make them shiny. He made 2 rows of the bars. He had mirrors on the floor, mirrors on the ceiling, reflecting each other. It looked like it was 40 stories tall, 40 stories deep. And then he had every single crew member roll up their sleeves and stick their hand through the bars. And we had a set, and we had our final scene. And I so love that story because when you don't have money, you really have to get creative if you want to tell your story. And so I think one of the things I love about television is the limitations. You can't, I mean, look, Marvel and Netflix, they can buy their way out of anything, but most shows have a very limited budget. And if you have a lot of ambition, like I do, you want to see how far can you take it. And for those of you in the room who worked on The Outpost, if you ever saw season 1, which was shot in the United States, you can see the enormous difference it made coming to Serbia. The show we made there felt like some kind of Saturday morning children's cartoon, and the movie we made here made Game of Thrones weep. So I think that's part of the fun of television.
And what do you think is the secret to successful television? I mean, with the shows that you've done that have run, like the first seasons of Leverage, which ran for 76 episodes. 76 episodes. What kept that show alive for so long?
Well, that particular show, I think that the magic was it allowed people for an hour to live in a world where the rich and powerful don't get away with it. And that was a great place to go escape. But what I would say in general, what I attribute when I've had success, it's because I don't try to have success. I just try to make the movie that I personally want to go see. Because I believe that if you are truly passionate about the thing you're making, whether it's an art film or a commercial film or anything, if you really have that passion for it, then there's a chance, it's not guaranteed, but there's a chance that that passion can become infectious and that other people will share that. And I think that every one of the films I did that did really well were films that I had enormous passion about. And there was enough other people who had that same desire.
But all filmmakers are very passionate, aren't they? I mean, with every project, with every filmmaker we get to meet, they're always blindly passionate.
It doesn't guarantee success. But we also, how many times have you been in a movie theater and seen a trailer and you could just hear the pitch meeting? And I've seen many times, like at the Sundance Film Festivals, directors taking movies so that one day they could do the movie they really loved. That, you know, and those never work. Now, just because you make the movie you really love doesn't mean that's going to work, but that's the only chance you have. If you're doing it because you think, well, I'm making this because people like this kind of thing, almost for sure it's going to fail.
In 2017, you returned to movies and directed your own blockbuster, Geostorm.
I still have PTSD over that.
I know. So we won't spend too much time on it. The movie, of course, stars Gerard Butler. I know it wasn't the happiest of experiences, but I wonder if you would share a little of what happened.
Well, again, that's a long story, but I think the short of it is, after the film was completed, I was replaced by another director, and they reshot 60% of the movie. And they decided that my kind of filmmaking is too old-fashioned because I like to have a lot of humor in the things I do. And they said modern films are very serious. And I kept trying to explain that it's not a serious concept. It's, in some sense, it was a farce about a trope. But if you take the farce part out, all you have left is the trope. So the movie that came out, the only thing that really was still in the film that I directed were the action sequences. And even then, all the humor and the fun of it was cut out of it. So it was a very depressing thing. My daughter had a small part in the movie, and they cut her out too. And it was just a miserable experience. So don't bother to see it.
But how difficult is it when productions that start out as passion projects, which we've all been involved with, are ultimately taken away from you or become bad experiences? I mean, that's one of the most challenging things in the business, would you say?
Absolutely. And I think that's where there's different types of talent that producers and directors have. And I think the people I've seen, for the most part, in the modern world who are successful are a little bit bullies, and they don't allow it to go south. But if you're not a bully, if that's not your personality, if you don't have a 500-pound gorilla next to you, the biggest star in the world who's also going to fight for you, it's very hard, especially today, because when we did Independence Day, one man made the decision to make the movie. But today, at every single platform, and I say that because it's all about streaming now, there's a whole green light committee where 23 people have to agree on what gets made. And that is not really conducive to making something original or something new. So we tend to do a lot of shows that are sequels and remakes and based on video games or based on children's novels, because it helps that particular format of getting a green light. And sometimes they're quite good. Sometimes they're quite good, but it's a different universe in getting something made today.
And what advice would you give to new filmmakers, young filmmakers, for dealing with that, for dealing with those kinds of challenges? Because if you make films, if you're in the business, these are not unusual situations. I mean, they do happen a lot, sadly.
Well, my advice is not good advice. My advice is be ready to deal with it and have a plan of action on how to deal with it. We were just talking in the car about, there's a great line at the end of a not very great movie called Hero that starred Dustin Hoffman. And at the end of the movie, Dustin Hoffman plays this kind of weaselly character. At the end of the movie, he's sitting on this bench with his 10-year-old son, and he says to his son, "Son, you want to know what life is all about?" "What, Dad?" "Life is all about bullshit." "What do you mean, Dad?" He goes, "Well, you see, the farther up you go in life, the more bullshit you gotta deal with. Now, your dad, I can only deal with about this much bullshit, so I'm never going here. I'm just gonna be right here." And he said, "That's all right, I love you anyway, Dad." But I think it's really true. So the reality is, if you're gonna get into the movie business, get ready to deal with a lot of bullshit.
You've certainly dealt with a lot of high moments, incredibly high moments with Independence Day and the success of Stargate, and a huge amount of shit, as you've said. You famously said to me once, after slipping into the Sava River, that there's always some shit somewhere. But what advice would you give to young filmmakers starting out today, or to people doing movies or TV shows? What's the most important thing that people keep in the front and center of their mind?
I think the single most important thing is to make movies. It's never been easier. Any iPhone can do really amazing quality video. There's no excuse to not just keep making films, you know. And I think one of the problems that people have is they're always waiting for someone else to tell them to go to work, or someone else to tell them their script is good, or someone else to tell them that they're a good filmmaker. And if you wait for someone else to give you a career, you're never going to have one. So my advice is just go make stuff. And once you're done making one thing, make another, and make another. There's never been an easier time to get your stuff seen. There's all kinds of platforms to get your product out there. And if you're good, you're going to get discovered, because people need good filmmakers. They're hard to find.
But keeping at it, that's part of the trick, right?
That's 100%. I was teaching at a film college in Los Angeles, and I said to the students, it's usually your 12th script that you finally get good at it. So you might as well just start writing, and then write the next one, and the next one.
That's very true. My last question before we ask the audience. You've now produced 3 seasons of US television here in Serbia, a science fiction film, and we're about to start a new show. For those people who are fortunate to be working on the show, what advice would you give them about working with you?
Forgive me? No, what I would say to anyone that's going to work with me is that I'm collaborative, but I do have a vision. So I want to hear when I'm wrong. I don't mind criticism, but be okay at the end of the day if I decide to do what I want to do anyway. And usually, when I hear good ideas, I'll gravitate to them. My wife always says, Dean, you just think your ideas are always the best. And I'm like, well, I'm me, I'm not somebody else. I gotta pick somebody. So I pick me. But I do believe in a collaborative process. A big chunk of Independence Day was improv. What I usually tell my actors on set is, make sure you give me at least one take exactly the way it was intended, and then you can give me other takes any way you like. But I gotta make sure I have the one that I needed. Television's a little bit harder because you get less takes. But I like a happy set. I don't like yelling on set. It's very rare that I do yell. So if I do yell, something went really wrong. And I believe that these things really do work as teams. That people tend to cover each other in a film. It was interesting. I actually heard from a psychologist once who said that he tries to teach people in relationships to think of their relationship like a movie set. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, in a normal relationship, if one person doesn't do what they were supposed to do, the other one will say, well, they didn't do it, so I'm not going to do it either. He goes, that doesn't happen on a movie set. If somebody lets down on their end, somebody else picks up the ball. They don't have time. They have to stay committed to getting the project finished. And if we look at our relationships in life the same way, we don't have an excuse because our partner didn't do what they were supposed to do. We have to pick up the ball. And I really think that that's a beautiful way of looking at all relationships in life. Your love relationship, your friendships. You're not let off the hook because the other person didn't do what you were hoping they'd do. And that's what I love about film sets. They really come together and they lift everybody up.
I think it was definitely like that on the Outpost.
For sure.
Let's open the floor to some questions. Anyone? Talkie, you must have prepared one at least.
Thanks. Hi. So, Warren, a long time ago. You answered a part of my question already, but a lot of your movies, I guess, kind of mark our childhood, and you come from kind of that part of the Hollywood that we know as maybe the golden age or whatever, what came after that. So now, in this position, when the electorate has its own app and is trying to has streaming services, where do you see the cinema going? Like, what's your opinion coming from way back, doing all that stuff? How do you see it developing in the future?
Well, this is going to be a very depressing answer I'm going to give you. And the answer is, I think movies are dying. I think cinema is dying. Now, I'm not saying that because I want that to happen. I made my career in cinema. I think that the movie theater experience is a culturally important one. It's not just, we go see a movie together. We actually go through trauma together, and we make it out together. I think part of why we're seeing a world even more divided than we've ever seen, or though we haven't seen in a long time, is because we aren't in movie theaters together. I was talking to some comedians, and I said to them, do you think that comedy is dying because we're all too politically correct? And he said, no, comedy's dying because people don't go to the movies. And I said, what do you mean? He said, Dean, when you were young, you were in a movie theater, and there was a joke, and these people over there laughed, and you didn't get it. But when they laughed, then you got it. And that's how we learn our sense of humor. Otherwise, the only sense of humor we have is what was in our house, our family's sense of humor, and it's limited. And when he said that, I realized it was really true, but I also realized so much of our social interaction is that we go into dark theaters with strangers and we get traumatized, or we get delighted, or we laugh, or we cry, and we do it together with people we don't know, and when it's over, we made it through it. And I think that's a hugely important part of society, and it kills me that I think that's dying. Do I think it could come back? I don't know. I hope so. One of the things that really frightened me was when I was teaching at this film school, I had 150 students. About 100 of them were from the United States, but 50 were from all around the world. And I was in charge of a screening program, much like this, where each week I would screen a movie and we would talk about it. And I said to the 150 students, I said, how many times a year do you physically go to a movie theater? 3 times a year. And I said, well, what movies do you go see? And they said, Marvel movies. And I said, okay, is that the kind of movies you'd like to make? No, I want to make movies like Truffaut. I want to do movies like Godard. And I went, okay, well, where do you want people to see your movies? Netflix. So if the next generation of filmmakers want to make their stuff for streaming platforms, I don't know how movies survive. So I would like that something happens that revives it, and if it does, I'll jump on that train in the first minute. But at the moment, we live in a streaming world, and that's where all the companies are placing their bets. People seem to really enjoy streaming. I think there's 2 different types of streaming. There's the lean in forward, and then there's the lean back. To me, the lean forward is when you've decided to watch something on your favorite streaming platform and you've sat down at 9:30 or whatever, and you've got all your stuff and you're ready to watch a movie, and then you watch it very intensely, the lean forward experience. But I also think there's a lean back experience, which is you come home from work, you're tired, you turn on the TV and you want something on, and then you go, oh, that's interesting, what is that? So that's more the AVOD world, or advertising supported television, which is what my platform is. So I hate my answer that I'm giving you, but I think movies are dying. I think the more interesting work, the more creative work, and where you actually get more freedom now, ironically, is television. There's so much content being made. They don't have as much time to micromanage you as you do when you do a $120 million movie. So, at least in the near future, I don't really see movies surviving, with the exception of the giant blockbuster or that odd art house movie that just caught fire in a bottle. But everything in between, I think they're gone.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up now, so thank you very much.
On that depressing note.
Ja, ali stavi onako horizontalno sliku.
Evo, super je.
Sorry, didn't be your fans. You know, I told them when I announced the movie that I made